you to put your name in the chat box. Maybe tell us a reason you're glad it's Friday. I know I am. I have had some tech issues today, so if you could join me in keeping your fingers crossed that we don't have any interruptions. I will be introducing our guest here in just a moment once we make sure we have people ready and joining us so they don't miss your awesome introductions. But again, as you come in today, I always say this on our Facebook Lives, but this is a conversation. This is an opportunity not just for me to ask questions that we think you might want to hear from our experts, but for you to ask questions. So if anything sparks an idea throughout today's conversation, please do put that question in the chat box. I see we have some friends saying hello, some Pet Partners friends, Megan from Phoenix, Alex from Nevada, and then we have Nikki from Boston, Kimberly. Hi, Kimberly, Mississippi. So we are in good company. Thank you so much again for joining us today, Allison and Molly. I'm going to go over your bios because they're really, really impressive. I want everyone to know just the magnitude of expertise we have here today, and then we'll dive into our conversations and give everyone a chance to say hello. So for all of you, a little background on our guest. Today we are continuing our series of talking to leaders in the AAI space and talking to professionals who incorporate therapy animals into their work. We know there's a lot more professionals who've been reaching out to us lately and looking for some guidance. So we're thrilled to have Alison Leslie with us. Alison is a therapist in Bloomington, Indiana, and she has 15 years experience working in the field of AAI, primarily with canines. She taught at the University of Denver's Institute for Human-Animal Connection for 6 years in the Animals and Human Health Certificate Program. She's fully trained and certified in EMDR, which we'll hear a little bit more about. That's something, an intervention within her role as a therapist, and somatic experiencing, which is another intervention, and has years of experience in including animals into those modalities. She provides specific consultation and specializations in developmental trauma, and she primarily works with children and adults who've experienced trauma as a guide in the healing journey. So thank you so much, Alison, for being here. And Molly DePrekel, a psychologist in private practice at the Midwest Center for Trauma and Hold Your Horses. I love that name. She also holds a certificate in EMDR, like Allison, yoga calm, and sensory motor psychotherapy, and has utilized the unique relationship people have with animals and nature to assist her in therapy for over 28 years. Molly has facilitated workshops, taught internationally, and volunteered with numerous organizations in the field of AAI and nature-based healing. So if any of you joining us today have questions on that, make sure you get those in the chat. She's the past president of the Equine Facilitated Mental Health Association, which is a branch of PATH, and is a contributing author to 3 books and has co-authored 6 manuals on AAI. So you can all see why we're so excited to have this conversation today. So much expertise, so much to learn. Again, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Awesome. So, and thank you everyone who's joining us as well. I see even more hellos in the comments. Hello from Texas, from Bellin's family. We have hello from Connecticut. So people from all over the world, and we have some grads of University of Denver Animal and Human Health Certificate Program with us. So you have some friends with you. I know I've gone over your introductions, but I just want to give the opportunity for you to introduce yourself however you'd like to our audience so they can get to know you a little bit better, maybe on a personal level, before we get started in our conversation.
Sure. Thanks so much. So I'm Alison Leslie. I'm here in Bloomington, Indiana. And, you know, I just really got into the field of animal-assisted interventions pretty on accident, which I think is kind of a little bit of my career altogether. So I originally went to grad school for social work because I really wanted to work with children outside. I wanted to do adventure-based therapy. I was really into experiential learning. My undergrad was in outdoor recreation. And so when I got to the University of Denver and I started realizing, wow, there's an animal component that I can start including into the work I was doing at the time, and there still is at the University of Denver, a certificate in animal-assisted social work if you're a student on campus there. And at that point, I was kind of starting to realize, although I loved the woods, I didn't really want to live in the woods for the rest of my life. And including animals, which had been, you know, I'd grown up with animals. Animals had always been near and dear to my heart. was another way we could start still being experiential and still be hands-on. I always knew that if I was somebody who was attending therapy, I wouldn't want to just sit and talk, especially as a child. That was not of interest to me. And I really wanted to figure out ways to help support children in their growth and in their learning and in their belief in themselves. And I found that animals were such a great way to support that experience for them. So that's kind of how I got started in that field. And then just, was lucky enough in my grad school time to be able to work with my therapy dog. And he came to school with me. He was the first therapy dog actually to graduate from the University of Denver with a partnership from Freedom Service Dogs. And so that was just such a great experience. And so, yeah, and then a little bit about me just now is I work in a group practice here in Bloomington. I have 2 kids. We have a dog and a cat, and just still love including animals as much as possible, even though currently right now I do not have a therapy dog who's working with me. My last therapy dog had to retire pretty suddenly, passed away just a few months later due to medical issues. So we adopted Harry. He's our dog now in August. And so he's still young and deciding if he really wants to do this type of work. So we'll see and experiment and kind of take his lead as we work through our own relationship and understanding what it is he might want to do in his job. We'll see.
Yeah, that's great. That's something that that these 2 can certainly teach us a lot about. I think we'll touch on it in the conversation today, but about following our animals' lead and matching them with the job. So can't wait to get into that. What about you, Molly?
So I am just really grateful to be here. I have a history with pet partners. My first therapy dog, Mariah, was a registered pet partner, and actually way long ago was a runner-up for therapy dog of the year and with pet partners. And so that was really cool. And she taught me a ton. I too have a background in private practice at the Midwest Center for Trauma and Emotional Healing, and also do equine therapy with the help of a horse at Hold Your Horses in Minnesota. And I'm saying hi to Holly and Lisa, who commented on the side page that they're from frigid places. So if I start having icicles hanging from my ears, it's because I am now in Minnesota. And I am originally from Michigan, and I got involved with animal therapy. I'm a grad from Michigan State and was in animal science, focusing on equine science. And I really realized back in the 80s, after visiting a lot of really big breeding farms, I didn't really want to work with big breeding operations and work with Arabians anymore. And at the same time, working at a camp for inner city kids, I really realized that people needed to have an exposure to nature because their whole somatic system changed when they were out with nature and out with animals. And I really tried to find a way to bring animals into my life's work. And remember back in 1985, before the internet, looking through a little book in the student service center at Michigan State, trying to find an internship, and I ran across Green Chimneys. And so back in 1985, I was lucky to live and work at Green Chimneys for 6 months as an intern, and it changed my life. And I've been at this work ever since, and every time I try to get away from it, something brings me back. So I'm supposed to kind of be doing this work, and I have therapy dog now, Finnegan, a golden retriever, and live with a retired therapy dog named Willow, who is a Feist. And for those of you that don't know, look up Feist on the internet. She's a very interesting 21-pound in charge, large and in charge, and loves to chase squirrels, but also loves people. And she's been really delightful in teaching me some things too. And I too am on faculty at the University of Denver, and my life's passion now, one of my mentors was Barbara Rector in animal assisted work with equines. And she said to me, "You're no longer the mayor, you're now the mentor." And I'm like, So my passion is to help others who want to get into this work, because when I first started, I literally, Maureen McNamara, who was a staff member at Pet Partners years ago, was one of my mentors too. And I just dug up people and said, "Tell me, teach me, show me," finding Aaron Ketcher, finding people at Green Chimneys, Maureen. And those folks have now said, "Okay, it's your turn to bring that work and mentor and consult with others who want to get into this work." So I'm so thrilled that the field is growing in the way that it is, and other therapists and other clinicians and other volunteers can get into it a lot easier, and just really delightful to be here.
Yes, thank you. And it is so interesting to hear, your testimony about how difficult it has been to get into the field and to know how to do it well. That's exactly why we're having these conversations at Pet Partners, and really hoping to connect our community, because now with all of this technology and especially with all of this passion, there's no reason for us not to connect, share best practices, and really help continue to inspire healing through this relationship with animals that we know is so powerful. So that is, I'm just looking forward to this conversation and more. So I want to touch on a little bit more. So we've talked about how you came to kind of get introduced to the field. What did it look like for you two when you first started to formally integrate your animals into your practice? So now you've graduated, you're going in. Maybe if there were any roadblocks or any just important experiences that you think you could share with us.
Sure. So, I think my journey was a little different than most. I graduated and was, invited to have a conversation with a woman who ran at the time what's called the Rocky Mountain Children's Law Center. And they were guardian ad litems for children in foster care. And they were doing a couple therapy things. They had a horticulture program. And I sat down and talked to this woman about animal assisted work, and she hired me on the spot to develop an entire program. And there were some really cool things about that and some big challenges because she didn't really talk about that with any of the lawyers. And so I came in really eager to do this work, and they were like, "What are you doing? What's animal assisted therapy? You want to take your dog to visit my kids at in these places?" And so there was a lot of education that I had to do and gain a lot of trust. Marley and I were in the office every day and, really just creating relationship in order to gain the trust of the rest of the staff that we could do the work to support their kids in succeeding and seeing themselves in different ways. And so I think that there's probably less challenge in that now because animal-assisted interventions is more widely understood and known. But I think making sure that when you get on board, it's not just whoever hired you that's important. It's the whole culture of the place you're working at and helping them understand what's the role of the animal you're including here. When are they working? When are they not? And we had to create those guidelines, especially in the beginning, because some of the staff, their love for animals became, well, Marley's actually doing work with them before he goes to do work with his actual clients, which were the kids. So we really had to work on understanding what that looked like so that Marley wasn't accidentally taking on too much throughout the day. And that would have been on accident, but it was still something important to be kind of cognizant of. And then, again, I had so much freedom, which I think is very unique as well, to be able to really design programs that match each individual child's needs and figure that out. And I think one of the things that is really cool about animal-assisted interventions is our availability to be spontaneous. You can always come with a plan, but you should always know your dog or whichever animal you're including may not want to do that plan to that day. And that's okay. We get to kind of go with the flow, and we get to invite curiosity and fun with go with the flow, and know that help people realize that, especially I was working with kids in foster care, what's safe is what's consistent. And they were able to then see throughout Marley's interactions and our time together that even if everything wasn't exactly the same every time, that was still okay. We could still create a safe container and a safe, fun place to invite spontaneity, to invite fun. And that's something that some of those kids had never seen before. And then I think the last thing I would say about that is watching those relationships develop with my therapy dog at the time, Marley, and those children was, I think, sometimes the first relationship that was positive in those children's lives.
Mm.
And I remember I used to pick up kids. I mean, these are things, I don't know if people do this anymore. I used to pick up kids from school. I had to find, we didn't have a place to go necessarily. So I was constantly finding parks, asking libraries, could we go? Churches, you know, getting Marley accustomed to those places before I brought the child. There was a lot of upfront work that would happen. To make sure that Marley was felt good in those environments, so that then we could create that safe space. Because if I knew if he didn't feel good, then the child would have a harder time settling in that space. But watching through their eyes, this belief in themselves, because this other living being, this animal, was excited to see them week after week. And I had one child, Marley would be in the back of the car, and he'd be buckled in, but when I would, when we were waiting, I'd unbuckle him since we weren't moving. And I remember Marley jumping the seat, so excited to see this child. And they couldn't believe that there was another living being so excited to see them.
Wow.
And the impact on just those small interactions, or things that would seem small to somebody who grew up maybe differently or believed that they were lovable, to watch that unfold, I think is truly, we don't like to use the word magical in this field because there's so much,
right.
Oh, we don't have science, but it's magical. It is magical to watch the unfolding of a person and their belief in themselves when they can see that reflected in another living being.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is hard because, we talk about how this is a field that is backed by science, that that can be done in a really meaningful way. But even still, you look at all the research and what happens in those interactions, I don't know that we'll ever have all the words for. So I love that you said that. And I love that you talked about how the need to go with the flow, whether you're a professional joining us today or you're a volunteer. I'm sure you can testify to situations, and put them in the chat if you do. Let us know times when you've had to go with the flow. It can help with some of the people who are just getting started. So thank you for that. What about you, Molly?
When I was listening to Allison, and I was like going check with some of the roadblocks and things like that, I can relate. And I think coming into this field, when I did too, it was helping others understand exactly what animal assisted interventions was, what bringing an animal into a therapeutic setting was about, and how to work it. Because there was a lot of, when I got into the field as a psychologist, there was a lot of, oh, my grandma had a dog visit at a nursing home. I think I know what you're doing, and things like that. And so it was educating them on more, well, this is a little bit different, and the dog isn't necessarily going to do every command we say, and things like that. And so it was more of that spontaneous and how the interactions can happen. And although my dog has a lot of training, sometimes I will allow them to have interactions to, like Allison said, help lead the sessions and co-facilitate. And out at the barn setting too, there was a lot of work in therapeutic riding, and then occupational therapy and physical therapy with the help of the horse too. And then working with some of my colleagues about, well, the work that I do is a little bit different in the fact that I want some more interaction, that the horse has maybe free to walk away or step in, and not like the horse has to stand there and be completely available at all times. Because if my clients are dysregulated, or if they're really not present, and they're anxious or things like that, that feedback from an animal that says, I might need to step away. And then for me to intervene and be able to say, okay, so how do we get you back in your window of tolerance? How do we help your somatic system chill out? And then to have the horse step back in was really lovely. And so I think some of those pieces, and then also, there was always that sense of, where do you belong? Because when I was starting to teach at the University of Minnesota for a bit, the vet school would say, I think you belong in the medical school. And then the medical school would say, I think you belong in the veterinary school. There wasn't really a place to kind of land, which I think has completely changed in this field. And, I know at the University of Denver, one of the fastest growing programs is a certificate course. So that's really lovely to see that change. And I think the continuing challenge in this field now is, how do we help professionals who want to include animals, and how do we help people really with the ethics of how to take care of their animals, and how to have the animals feel like they have the ability to say yes and no sometimes, and the ability to rest. And the other thing is, I will still often get calls that people will say, I have had every other therapy, or my child has had every other therapy, And we believe that animals are going to be the way to go now. And so there's a little bit of pressure to be everything to everybody. And I had a therapy dog once who was doing really well one-on-one in groups in the schools when I was an outreach worker at the YMCA, and the schools were great to have the dog in. It worked great. And then they wanted me to work with a group of people who had some intellectual challenges. And the dog walked in, and there were people that were in wheelchairs and different things. And the dog was not as, probably a mistake I made, not as exposed to that and not as thrilled. And it didn't go well. And the dog ended up getting sick. And it was a really huge lesson for me way back in the 90s about, wait a minute, my dog doesn't have to be everything to everybody. And the facilitator of that group was so disappointed that we weren't going to come back. But I had to really be the responsible person for my animal and say the stress response of the dog doesn't allow that dog to feel good about working in that environment. And really, it gave me an opportunity to educate people about animals, dogs, cats, horses are not everything to everybody. And how do we hold the space for them to be able to feel comfortable, to feel safe, that ethical treatment of the animal that's also involved in the work that we do. So I think those kinds of things. And then I think the other one thing I would say, one story that I have is that I was working with an adolescent once, and my dog would sit on the floor with her and literally put his paw on her hand and hold it. And the mom at the time wasn't too sure about that. So she sat on the floor suddenly and grabbed the paw out of her daughter's hand and held it. And my dog took her paw and tucked it underneath her. And then as soon as the mom went and sat in the chair, she took her paw out and stuck it back in the little girl's hand. And the mom looked at me and she goes, I wasn't sure about this therapy, but I get it. And it was a moment where I could really go, okay, how do we meet the needs of your daughter? And how do you stay to be in the mom? And then allowing the mom, well, I want comfort too. Well, then we got to get you your own therapy and things like that. But it was so beautiful and live and in the moment that I couldn't recreate that in any way, shape, or form. So it was very lovely.
That is, that is, and you've touched on things that professionals, volunteer handlers, no matter who you are, we can relate. And if you haven't gotten started on visiting yet, I have seen some people who are on here saying they're getting ready, but COVID stood in our way. We do have some other Facebook Lives, by the way, for those of you who've commented that about really specifically on COVID. But when you're taking your animal into these places, one of the hardest things, at least for me getting started, was balancing the expectations that people had, feeling confident enough to be the voice for my animal, to give boundaries when needed. And I think there's just such a beautiful invitation here, though, as we say this, our perfectionism is so evident, right? We want to be all things to all people. And it's just not an attainable thing for animals or people. So there's a really beautiful invitation to kind of step into that space where things don't always go completely as planned. I also love how you both kind of touched on some success stories. If you have any more that you would like to share before we move on, I'm about to open that conversation up, and to everyone who's viewing, if you have a success story that you'd like to put in, it's motivational for all of us to read those. So please do.
And I think on that note, Allison, we put together a couple slides that might have a couple success stories that we could maybe even show a couple of those and kind of go from there.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, so one of the things that Molly and I are both, touched on a little bit is that, we do lots of different types of modalities, right? We're both EMDR trained. We both are trained in somatic work. And I think it's important to remember that animal-assisted interventions can really be folded nicely into whatever your practice may be. So there's no specific, this is the right way to do animal-assisted interventions. I think anytime you're including an animal ethically, you're advocating for that animal, you're allowing that animal to have choice throughout their entire experience. Those are the most important pieces as you then decide and conceptualize how is the animal going to fit best in this experience. And so, throughout my career, I've had lots of successes depending on lots of different factors, whether that be when we're using cognitive behavioral therapy, which I did earlier in my career. Now I'm doing EMDR and somatic work. And one of the things Molly was talking about, it really reminded me, I had a client, we were working on a young client. She was working with my second therapy dog, Ray. And we were working through some anger of hers through some somatic experiencing work. And so her fists are balled up. Ray's just, Ray has full choice of where she wants to be in the office. Our office door is closed. She's off a leash. So she can move around. She always would choose to just lay right next to us, though, for the most part. And so this little girl's got her fist balled up. She's like this. And all of a sudden, Ray stands up, noses her hand. She allows her hand to very slowly open, and Ray licks her hand. And she looks up at me and she goes, my hands aren't for punching. They're for being loved. And I thought, that's the spirit. That I could have never done that for her. And then we were able to resource using EMDR, some EMDR techniques, though that belief in herself. My hands are not for hurting. They're for something else. And so she had that somatic information inside. She had that image of that experience. And then we were able to create, real neural networks in her brain to connect all of those pieces. So the next time she noticed her fist doing this, she could open it up and remember that tactile experience and bring up Ray's face, telling her there's another way. And it was just so powerful. And so always remembering that anytime we have an interaction with an animal that's positive, that we learn something from, in the CBT work I used to do, this is actually, if you can see it, they're kind of small, so I apologize for that. This is a little girl in her elementary school who was teaching Marley, my first therapy dog. This is a little girl I was working with. She really wanted to teach Marley. I let all my kids teach Marley a trick. They would just pick a trick. I would always say, Marley may learn this, and he may not. And that's okay. We're just going to see how it goes. And then they were able to confront a lot of negative belief systems they had about themselves, but they were able to really kind of put that onto Marley. So she wanted to teach Marley to jump over something. So we just used, I think that's my Chuck It wand. I mean, you don't have to have fancy equipment. Like, these are obviously chairs from the school and a Chuck It, right? But it worked. Yeah. And she was able to say, Marley doesn't believe in himself that he can do this. Marley doesn't, those were her negative beliefs about herself, but it was safe to say, this is how Marley felt. And then we were able to explore that. I wonder why Marley would feel that. I wonder what's a different way Marley might feel. And through relationship, she got Marley to the next picture you see there is Marley jumping over the Chuck It. And then she was able to notice that about herself. Wow, we can do it. I can do that. And so it's the relationship. It's the belief in self. It's the follow through and whatever that relationship building piece is that is able to be then implicitly held by our clients, by the people we're working with. And those, we talk about how there's so much science behind it. That is so much of our nervous system being repatterned. Week after week, interaction with interaction, that is very challenging to do in other types of talk therapy. So I just love that piece, and knowing that, what I know now about our nervous system, about the brain, about so much more of the implicit ways that animals really can impact so many different systems in an ongoing way that we now get to bring awareness to. And I just find that so amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I would love it too if we could bring up the slide with the client and the horse, and I'll just introduce my friend Willow. She sometimes when I'm in Zoom, she does her own telehealth. So if she hears a client's voice that she recognizes from the past, she'll jump up. She's retired now, but she is my Feist. So this is her, and she is completely bored here in Minnesota, but she's joining you. And I also want to give a shout out to Deborah. I just saw your note, and it's nice to see you on Facebook. And it's been a long, long time. So I love the fact that you're here. So the slide I want to just talk about is interventions with the horse. And I kind of had to sketch out the person's face, but I couldn't resist. It's Valentine's Day, so I had to add a little color to her. But anyway, to her face about with the pink and things like that. The piece here is you're going to be calming in her body and allowing the the felt sense of that neurology that Allison is talking about. She's doing what's called Tellington T-touch on the horse's ears. And this was a client who was pretty fearful of horses, but wanted to develop some of her own calming and things like that. And she came after a really extreme incident at school where she was a social worker. But that sense of soothing, if you can notice, I have her eyes still there, that she has a calmer eye, the horse has a calmer eye, and you're giving them an opportunity to calm, you know, a 1,200-pound horse, equine, in that activity. And then she can maybe have that felt sense of what that feels like in that sensory motor marker of, oh, I remember what it felt like to calm the horse in this moment. And then maybe I can do some of my own self-regulation and self-soothing when needed in the experience of when I'm dysregulated in my own time. So I actually work with a lot of folks to be able to take what they're doing with the animals at the barn or in the office and practice it in their own life, because then there's that felt sense. And so using this opportunity with the horse to develop that sense of self-calming, and I'll often take a picture of this and give it to the client so that they later can go, oh yeah, I remember what it felt like to take a deep breath. Thanks, Willow. I remember what it felt like to calm the horse. I know what that feels like in my body. I can bring that up when I need it. And that stuff is, again, like Allison was saying, that's priceless. And again, with this equine experience, it's important to, after we have interactions with the animals, I'm going to go back to that ethical treatment. It's important to give the animals an opportunity to take a walk, to have a different experience. I do a wipe down of the horses and the dogs when I'm done with session, to just literally say out loud, you don't have to wear any of this, because I work a lot with people with severe trauma, both adults and teens. And when animals are in the presence of hearing very intense stories sometimes and being with people who are dissociated, it's important that they have an opportunity, just like we do, to do their own deep breath, self-care, go for a walk when they're done. So I just want to stress that also, and open to any questions down the road, because we're giving you kind of a snapshot of what we do. And I think there's a lot more. We're kind of skimming the surface. And if we go into the deep end of the pool, there's a lot more to be said. So thanks for bringing up that slide.
Absolutely. These are such great testimonies to the power of this intervention and to the work that you two do as professionals. I'll be looking here for some questions as they come in. I see we've had a lot of chat activity, but in the meantime, while I look through those, I'm wondering, you talked about being committed to the ethical treatment of our animals and making sure that this is something that that does not do any harm to them. When it comes time, Allison, you mentioned early on, that you had to retire a therapy animal, or if it's time just to stop a intervention. I'm wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about how you make those decisions, and what that looks like for you as a professional and as someone who has the well-being of your clients who've really come to depend on these interactions. If you could just talk us through that some.
Yeah, so this is a conversation Molly and I have been having. We created another webinar for Oakland University, actually, just on that topic of retiring your therapy animal, both through the lens of the animal, the client, and the handler. And there's so many different reasons you may need to retire a therapy animal. One being, medical issues. That was my second therapy dog, Ray. She had some severe medical issues. She needed to be retired almost immediately once they were identified. My first therapy dog, Marley, he just didn't want to do the work anymore. He had been doing it for 7 years and he lost the enjoyment. And those are things we have to, as handlers, be aware of. Does our animal still like this? Is there anything in our setting that has changed that may impact our animal? That could be different populations. That could be just the office setting. We moved offices when I was with my therapy dog, Ray. I work in a group practice, and I had to advocate for her. I said, well, if I'm in that office space, Ray can't come to work because the space was too small for her. She wouldn't have had choice. She wouldn't have had movement. So there's so many factors that we get into. And I think, the hardest, you touched on something really important, Taylor, is that our clients tend to, this is what's working for them. And there's just a lot of stuff to go through when you are retiring a therapy animal, whether that be immediately, whether there be time and space. And you want to, be an advocate. It is our job to advocate for our animals first and foremost. They have done so much for us and for our clients day in and day out, no matter if they only work once a day, if they, work. I never really advocate for an animal working every day, all day long. That's not in their best interest for most companion animals who are doing this job. But we want to just be really aware. And I think one of the things that's really neat about this process is we are constantly modeling throughout our sessions that our animals are important. So as we model that all the time, then when we come in and say, oh my gosh, you know what, we have a hard conversation we have to have, it's just another example of how we take care of somebody that we love, that we model, that we can make hard choices and sacrifices for the betterment of somebody else, for another living being. And although that's challenging and there's a lot that goes into that, to model that to somebody who's maybe never seen that, whose family life never took their perspective into account, their best interest into account, which are a lot of the clients probably Molly and I both are seeing at this point, to model that to a client and let them say goodbye in a way that's meaningful, that's impactful. The clients that I used to work with in foster care, they had never had a positive experience in a goodbye. But we were able to give that to them. We were able to take the time and the space to work on what does a positive goodbye look like, and that goodbye could even be positive was shocking to so many people. And so although it's challenging and it's hard, it's our responsibility as handlers, whether you're a volunteer, this is your livelihood in your business. When I retired Marley, my whole business closed. I didn't have a therapy dog anymore. I wasn't doing animal-assisted interventions. Positive possibilities no longer existed. And I had to make that decision, but I had to make that decision because it was best for him. And he had done enough for all of us. So, I don't know. What do you think, Molly?
I'm right there on that page for you. And I think, Allison, you bring up a good thing is like, who is my identity, or what is my identity now that I'm not working with my therapy animals? And, sometimes even when I go to therapy and my client will say, oh, where's Finnegan? And I'm like, well, here's the deal. It was 17 below this morning, and I decided it wasn't a good idea to bring him. And then with COVID, there was a lot of, I'm not bringing my animals to therapy because we don't know enough yet and things like that. And then it's that the client's realizing, oh, okay, I'm not always going to have the animal present, but being able to bring in animal assisted interventions, even if the animal isn't in the session. And also recognize I am a clinician first, and my work is really involved with helping my clients and assisting there and standing watch while they do their healing work, whether there's an animal present or not. And then also it's kind of like, well, I'm kind of disappointed too, because I like having the animals, because it forces me to get up out of my chair a little bit more. It forces me to play a little bit more, and it forces me to be me in ways that clients find just delightful. And so how to balance all that. And then if you can't have an animal, maybe you go outside and you plant a plant, or you walk in the woods even when you're not with your dog. And then, I think just finding different ways to do it. We've had to do a lot of telehealth stuff, which I think could be in and of itself its own session. But how do we bring horses on the screen? How do we get them used to being in the computer? How do you sit next to a stall and read a book to your clients, or talk through stuff and have the horse head here and them not be in person, but you reach up and you're their hand and you scratch the horse? And I mean, there's just all sorts of ways to get creative. And I think in this field that has caused me to have to really work with that part of my brain that says creative, invent. And one of my clients said, I watch you work with the horses. I watch you work with the dogs and the people that you work with. She said, I think in your former life, you were a conductor of a 3-ring circus. And it was like, some days it feels that way, because there's an attunement you have to the animal. There's an attunement you have to your clients, and then you're managing all the time. How are we going to do this, or what's going to happen? And when do I need to give my dog a break? Or when, if you're in a session, one of those moments where it's, it's getting a little stinky in here, and saying to your client, time out, I got to take the dog outside. But that's about how life is. And it teaches people to be able to handle a little bit of spontaneity, and to be able to regulate themselves while you handle the needs of your dog. And I think that, or the needs of the horse, or whatever you're doing, I think that's really powerful.
Those are great suggestions.
long answers to short questions. But
no, I love it. And I think you might have just signed yourself up for another Facebook Live if you're not careful on creative solutions, especially in COVID. So don't think we won't be emailing you again about that. And if you agree that we should do that Facebook Live, put it in the chat so that we can have even more reason. I did see one question come in that I wanted to ask. I think this is a great question for mental health professionals. Bob asked, notice that in doing therapy animal visits with his dog, that the group settings was not the best fit, that really there was a preference for the one-on-one settings, but not being a mental health counselor, Bob was wondering if you have any suggestions for setting appropriate boundaries, because, in that one-on-one setting, there can be more disclosure that as someone who's not a mental health counselor, how do I deal with that? So could you speak to that for Bob for us?
I think I can do that from the farm perspective a little bit, and then Allison maybe from the office. We have animal handlers and equine specialists that help in the session sometimes when needed to handle the horses while we're working with the clients. And I also do a form of therapy called co-treats where we're doing some occupational therapy and mental health at the same time. And so the OT might be in there or an OT student, and I will literally say, I need you to step away for a minute, or I say to my clients real directly, if there's something that's a little delicate, it's okay to say, I need a minute with Molly, or really humbling, Molly, step away, I need a minute with the horse, which has been interesting. But the boundaries, I think for Bob and others, ask for training from wherever you're going to bring your animal about policies, about confidentiality, understand what it means to be a mandated reporter, and then to be able to have relationships with whatever clinician you're working with that says, if there's ever a moment you need me to step away, I can step away. Make sure that your dog is okay if you do step out of earshot, or your horse, that it can be okay, that the animal can be still pet by the client, but you don't have to listen to what's going on. To be able to say to the client, it's okay if you don't want me to listen. You can talk to the therapist and I can just step over here, or I can step out with my dog for a little bit. But really important to understand the environment that you're working with, because I've heard from volunteers that they feel set up sometimes because there isn't training on the front end, or they've gone into an environment literally and been traumatized themselves if they're on a mental health unit and they see someone who is really out of control and staff have to step in. So it's important to understand, ask for that training. And if you're feeling like you're not getting it, it may not be the environment that you want to bring your dog into, or your cat into, or your animals. But Allison, other thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think you really touched on the main points, and that would be making sure you understand your role as a mandated reporter in whatever state you're in and what that looks like. Depending on the state you're in, there's mandated reporter for adults and children. So understanding and letting your client, whomever you're working with, know also that you are a mandated reporter. And so that if they are going to disclose, that they understand what that could potentially be, so that clients are not blindsided by thinking, well, my therapist is somebody who has to report, but I can just share with them and nothing is going to happen next. And that breaks a relationship bond with a client that is really tricky. I think the other thing Molly talked about that I think is also really important is making sure you have a training and you understand what your role is, and then clearly helping the client understand that as well, so that there is a way to, if you're working in the diamond model, which it sounds like Bob might be or wanting to be, that there is an understanding of what those relationships look like and what that back and forth is. And then again, I think, Molly said something really interesting, which is if the client needs the handler to walk away, is the animal able to be present and safe without the handler there? And those are going to be things that the handler and the animal and whomever the other person is are going to want to navigate, because there are some handlers and animals who are not going to feel comfortable with that, and there might be some who are. And you don't want to be put in a situation as the handler to say, oh yeah, I can leave my dog and I can just step right outside, but then the animal be dysregulated and actually no longer a comfort in that moment. So making sure we really understand what the boundaries, what everyone's comfort level is. And I think the other thing I would suggest for Bob is just taking a general mental health first aid class so that you understand some just general techniques of grounding that might be helpful along the way, or getting some training from whatever agency you're working with that might be supportive for whatever type of client you have.
Yeah,
and I would add too.
Go ahead, please, Molly.
I would just add too, to think outside. Oops. To think, maybe for Bob to think outside the box. So maybe you approach an agency and say, I would like to do 5 minutes with your client before the session, or can you have a 10-minute playtime with my dog after their session? Because often if there's a big session that a client has, they come out of the office and they're like a little bit dysregulated, to play with their dog for 10 minutes or do something like that as a visit and a comfort. For some of my clients, they actually knock on my door if I'm not in session, and a client will say, can I just pet Finnegan for a few minutes before I go home? Or can I, I have a colleague therapist who says, can I just take Finnegan out to go to the bathroom with my client for 2 minutes? And it's a way that the animal can contribute, but doesn't necessarily have to be right in the session. So thinking outside the box.
Can I add something to that too? Because that's so smart, Molly. I love that idea. And, it goes again back to the science of what animals provide for our nervous systems, and noticing, sometimes our nervous systems can accidentally get into the pattern of, in order to feel better, I have to feel worse. I have to talk about my junk in order to get to feel better. And instead, what Molly's doing in that example of saying, hey, can we play with the animal first, is you're breaking that cycle. Is you're showing, we can have good, we can have yuck, we can have good again, that our nervous system has the capability and availability to regulate up and down. And so when we can bring in animals in different small doses and disrupt some of that patterning that may have accidentally taken place in different places, what a great way. And then Bob doesn't have to worry about any of that stuff, because his real goal and job is really just oxytocin release, fun, and play. So smart, Molly. Good job.
Yes, that is. And that speaks, we did have someone bring up it can be difficult for volunteers, especially for pet partners volunteers. We have some standards in place that are different for professionals. For example, our handlers cannot surrender the leash. They have to be there to be an advocate for their animal at all times. That's your job. So to have that ability and to talk to the professionals beforehand, or talk to the facility leaders on how you're going to handle those. The hardest thing is when you're caught by surprise, and no matter what you do, you always will find some instance in life that's going to catch you by surprise. But really that communication beforehand. And do know, for those of you joining us, Pet Partners has some resources for you. We'll put them in the chat, some trainings, and our animal assisted crisis response program. Even if you might not be really thinking you want to respond to crisis in your community, I have to say, I went through a master's of mental health counseling program and thought I knew it all. And I took, when I first got hired, our crisis response training, and I learned a lot, created by some brilliant minds. We had Dr. Leslie Stewart working on that for us. So with some other people who just shared so much knowledge to how we respond as humans in this very particular context. So those are great solutions. I want to be mindful of time. So if you've asked a question and we haven't got to it, don't worry. We're going to review the comments, and we'll be in touch to answer your questions. But before we wrap up, I wanted to see if you two could share with us. We've talked about how this field is developing, and about how much good can be done when people are empowered to advocate for their animals and share their love of animals, whether it be through volunteerism or professional work. What are your biggest hopes for this space that we're in as people who work with therapy animals?
Well, I want to go back to the piece about just kind of recapping about holding the leash. I think you could hold the leash and still have the client maybe face away and talk to the therapist. They're petting the dog. There's ways, I think, to be able to do that in creative ways, with still following the best practices and following the pet partners' best practices. So saying that. And then I think the question was about hope for the field and growth. I would like to put up our last slide as we talk about this around consulting, because I think for me, my hope in this field is that we can grow and offer opportunities for people who want to get into this work. We have consultation that we have to participate in as mental health professionals on a regular basis. And we have a lot, especially in the horse field, of different places where you can go get a certificate or certification And I don't necessarily believe we need more of that. I think we need ongoing consultation for people who want to be able to bring this work into their daily life and into their practice, and to be able to say, I had a client who, or I have this issue with my animal that, and offer consultation so that people feel prepared for whatever they're going to encounter, and to have that ongoing support and training. I also believe that we have to start to utilize words that maybe the medical field, the world of volunteerism already understands, and so be able to say things like, animal assisted interventions is really about this and this, and have a tagline that says it and states it, so that if I don't know anything about this, I don't feel like you're speaking Greek. So I think we need to start to be able to explain to people who aren't doing this work what it really looks like. I actually had a client once in my office, and it was a dad, and I was doing family therapy, and he said, can I take a time out? I said, sure, what's up? And he goes, are we doing therapy here for your dog, or is your dog going to help our family? And so I realized, oh, we have some work to do here, but it was quite humorous. And then I believe that more college courses that involve animal assisted interventions, and bring it to professional training and development, post-certificate course for professionals in this field, an opportunity to understand the role of the ethical treatment of animals. And you know what? I believe too, going forward in this field, people need to understand the animal's behavior of the animal they're working with. So if they're going to work with cats, they need to understand cat behavior. So get some training in what cat calming signals look like, what behavior of cats look like, what stress response looks like. Same with horses, same with dogs. And I could go on, but I want to give Alison an opportunity. So go for it.
No, I think I really just champion everything that Molly just said. I think one of the things that in the mental health field that lots of other intervention strategies include in their training and require for ongoing utilization of that model is ongoing supervision and consultation. And when we are including an animal, basically at least 3 different nervous systems we are trying to attune to and understand. When we are really working in this model where we are including another living being, we have got to have ongoing consultation. It is required in so many other places, and it's really not talked about very often in animal-assisted interventions, which is really a shame and a place that we drop the ball. There are so many good intentioned people out there doing this really important work with completely on their own, with no one to ask questions to, with maybe a supervisor who's never included an animal in their work before. I know that was the case for me. You know, I'm fresh out of grad school. I'm working with new kiddos who have had horrific pasts. And here I am trying to do this work. And I was lucky that I was still in Denver and I still had my mentor, and that I was still, needing supervision hours for my licensure. But I really, truly believe that ongoing conversation in whatever way that might look is so important. And then I think the other thing I would really mention is, and I think there's a big push for this now, is understanding the co-role of our therapy animal and the extremely important understanding of choice. Is that our animals are not there to serve us. Almost the exact opposite. We are including our animals, and they have full choice whether they want to participate in that session or not. And so I think there's a push and overtraining at times for our therapy animals. Well, I'm going to teach them to be in a place for 30 minutes. Well, you can train them to do that, but that doesn't mean they want to do that in the middle of that session. And if they're overtrained and they're overriding their system, then we are not doing anybody any favors. We are not modeling anything good for our client. We are not modeling anything good for our animal. We are not doing ourselves any good either, because that animal is going to burn out so quickly. And then the client is thinking, wow, there's a different sense and feel in the office. Whereas when my therapy animal can get up, go get a drink of water, and that's disruptive to a client for sure. I've had a client say, why did Ray just walk away from me? And then I was just like, oh, let's just watch. Ray walks over, gets a drink of water, and comes back. Wow, she came back, and and then that was such an aha moment. Wow, I really believed something bad about myself when Ray got up. I wonder how often I do that in day-to-day life. And if I didn't give my therapy animal choice, that type of learning would never happen. And so I really hope, that's the hope for the field, is ongoing conversation and dialogue, consultation, the belief that our animals are there because they want to be, not because we want them to be, and to have full choice in whatever it is that's going to happen in that session.
Yeah. Well, those are certainly desires that we can get behind at Pet Partners, and we see ourselves as having this opportunity to facilitate this kind of conversation. For those of you who are joining us today, you might have heard some news, and maybe some of you belong to our professional e-newsletter. If not, please do join us on that newsletter. We'll put it in the link. But it really is our mission, and going into the next year, you're going to hear a lot of exciting announcements about this. But how do we better serve the professionals who serve all of the people in the world right now who, after the year we've been through, we need our helpers and our healers more than anything. And so we're really committed to being a place to have these conversations, to continue this education. So make sure that those of you who are joining us today are signed up for that newsletter, so that we can tell you about opportunities that we have and opportunities that we hear about. We'll ask Molly and Allison to keep us posted on anything you hear about, and we'll also blast that out to everyone. So this has been...
On that note, if you have an interest in more about retiring your therapy animal, if you go to the Oakland University, they do have that webinar that we did on retiring your therapy animal. And Allison and I are offering consultation to professionals and to volunteers in this very important work. So our website, carnshealing.com, was up there. And reach out to us at any point with questions, and if we can be helpful. And I so appreciate Pet Partners and the opportunity to be here. And thanks, Ann Howie, for your nice comments too. It's fun to see people that I see on the side. It's hard not to read the comments.
I know.
And visit people. So thank you. Thanks, Allison.
Thank you. Thanks so much for inviting us, Taylor, to have this conversation. Molly and I could talk for hours, and we have, about these topics, and they're just near and dear to our heart. And so thank you so much for all you do in supporting animals and all that Pet Partners does. And thanks for everyone who was, took time out of their day to listen to us kind of ramble on about our love and our passion. And thanks to all of them for all they do to support animals and people in the world around them and their communities.
Yes, well, you are with kindred souls. I think everyone has loved this conversation. Lots of thank yous coming through the chat. So thank you both. Everyone have a wonderful weekend. If you have a wonderful weekend with your Valentine, human or animal, give them a hug for me if they would enjoy that. I always have that invitation out. So thanks, everyone.
Great. Thanks.